So I'm going to talk about, well, the old guideline, the ideas behind the concept paper, potential issues, and especially about the comments we got on the concept paper. Okay, I can. Okay, well, you know the EMA points to consider, which was called points to consider, not guideline, but which is considered to be a guideline on multiplicity issues, was issued 10 years ago, or was adopted 10 years ago, and it described when the multiplicity adjustment is needed, when not. What about secondary endpoints? What do we do with claims from secondary endpoints, conclusions from subgroups, interpretation from responder analysis, handling of composite endpoints, among other things. So it is a very good guideline, and it's already quite comprehensive with respect to the potential issues we have in multiplicity. So we have to figure out what can we add to this guideline, what is needed, what has to be clarified, what has to be rectified. Okay. So going to some specific points, well, you probably know, well, there are some statements on when adjustment is needed and when adjustment is not needed. For example, it's not needed, well, as stated in the old guideline, when you have two co-primary endpoints or when you have a hierarchical procedure. Then, well, the question that was also asked in some of the comments, what is a multiplicity adjustment? Do we have a problem in terminology here? If we have co-primary endpoints, then it's a special way to deal with multiple endpoints. So maybe in this way, terminology could be adjusted in some way. Okay, but of course, well, in these cases, for primary endpoint referring to the success of a study, the basic principles are already in the old guideline. Okay, the old guideline also talks about subgroups, conclusion for subgroups. When can we make conclusions for subgroups? When can we have a claim for subgroups? When it's likely to be accepted, when not, and so on. What do we do with heterogeneity between subgroups? And there are a lot of questions. And we are currently preparing actually a new guideline on subgroup analysis and dealing with most of the problems. But we have also decided that if we are going to issue a new guideline on multiplicity, then the confirmatory conclusions on subgroups should be tackled in the multiplicity guideline. Okay. Secondary endpoints. This is mentioned in the old guideline. If no claim is intended, no adjustment is needed. If claims are intended, then you need some confirmatory testing, and the multiple testing problem applies. So this is mentioned in the old guideline, but what is not mentioned, when do we really need to have a confirmatory conclusion in secondary endpoints? And this is probably the most controversial point. When do we need confirmatory proof for a claim? What is a claim? And this was also mentioned by Rob, that we are not quite clear about the term claim. Maybe we are less clear about the term claim than you are in the US. And you have probably a better idea of what this means. Probably you have another environment. You make advertisement for claims, etc. And we are not in Europe. You are not allowed to make advertisement and so on. So maybe there is a different environment in the US. So if we talk about secondary endpoints, then we have technical issues. And this was also mentioned by some of the speakers. Well, you have technical issues, how to go forward from primary to secondary endpoints. It's probably more a technical issue. Okay. In general, basic principles, yes, are still valid. Well, when we talk about study success and type 1 error control related to study success. There are certainly some clarifications needed. What is the role of additional claims? What is the role of secondary endpoints? Maybe some points on terminology and additional issues as the issue with the confidence intervals. Do we need confidence intervals that relate to the testing procedure, but could be very difficult or impossible to get reasonable confidence intervals? And we have some, let's say, consistently problems with more complex multiplicity frameworks. And maybe I give some points here later. Okay, wait a minute. Oops, yeah, that's. So we issued a concept paper on the need for a new guideline on multiplicity. Well, it says a need for a guideline because the old one was points to consider, but actually it would be a new guideline or an update of the guideline, which was called points to consider. Right. Yeah. Okay. So we are talking about different sources of multiplicity, and this has certainly increased during the last 10 years. We have multiple sources of multiplicity, and all these combinations can make up a very complicated framework. We have new strategies. We explicitly said in the concept paper that we are not going to talk about technical issues about this or that strategy, although there were some examples given and maybe this was understood. But I think the idea was not to talk about technical issues and give advice on special multiplicity procedures. Okay, multiplicity issues and confirmatory conclusions in subgroups, and these relates to the confirmatory conclusions pre-specified subgroup analyses and how do we deal with this. Multiplicity issues arising from interim analyses when we have secondary endpoints, how do we deal with secondary endpoints in interim indecisions, etc. Multiplicity in multi-regional developments, come back to this later. And simultaneous confidence intervals corresponding to multiple test procedures. So this is stated in the concept papers. This might not be complete, and there will certainly be some other minor or major, well, depends on how the discussion will go forward, issues that could be considered in a potentially new guideline. Okay. So what are just some basic ideas about drug approval and multiplicity? What are the basic principles in drug approval? To simplify, the first thing we want to do is to demonstrate efficacy, which is the study success, which defines the win criterion. We want to see a favorable risk-benefit or benefit-risk, and then something that you may call additional claims, additional, let's say, yeah, say claim, okay, need to be demonstrated in a confirmatory way after general efficacy has been proven. This will somehow also be in the old guideline. So, and the question is, what is a claim that needs to be demonstrated in a confirmatory way? Or are there claims that needs to be demonstrated in a confirmatory way? Okay, so win criterion, well, you may have different tests, different hypotheses. If you have only one, then you're fine. If you have two, and you may have co-primary endpoints, then both of the requirements must be fulfilled. You may have multiple possibilities, so A or B. So there are different ways to define a win situation. And if this relates to the study success, then multiplicity should be applied. Also already mentioned in the old guideline. Okay. You may think about specificity or specificity of drug approval when you think about type 1 error, but you all know this. And yeah. Okay. There is a discussion on weak and strong family-wise error rates, and I think that the current idea is that we have to apply the strong family-wise error rate, well, which relates to the probability that the drug is approved, if there is no effect in any of the combinations of the hypotheses. Okay. Multiplicity, we know, and this relates to the complexity, the increasing complexity of multiplicity issues, relates to many different sources as endpoints, populations as subgroups, dose groups, regimens, multiple looks, etc. And if you have a combination of all these things, might get very, very complicated. Okay, secondary endpoints we talked about. So there are some methods proposed to deal with secondary endpoints, but still the role of secondary endpoints has to be clarified. What is a confirmatory claim or what is a descriptive label? And when do we need to have confirmatory proof, and when do we have to put it into the multiplicity strategy? There might be, we may end up with the opinion that this only partially relates to the multiplicity guideline, but must be somewhere in the SPC guideline, for example. Okay. When we talk about multiplicity issues, we talk about our frequentist thinking, and this is by many people this is not very well understood, and this is probably the main problem in the discussion, that we apply our frequentist thinking, but many people don't understand what we are doing. At the end of the day, we look at the data and we look at, well, we are somehow not Bayesians, but likelihoodians, or how do you call it, looking at the data, and we do not care anymore about the design and how these data were generated and how the possibilities upfront were to come to a positive result. So, and then of course we can end up in counterintuitive results, or in results that are difficult to discuss. Well, a very simple example is a hierarchical procedure, and maybe, let's say, a false hierarchy or a stupid hierarchy. For example, you test the low dose first and then the high dose, and you have a very highly significant result in the high dose, but it was the second test in the hierarchical procedure, then it's not significant. Well, you cannot claim that there is a success in the high dose because you did it the other way around, but everybody would tell you, well, you clearly see that it's effective. I mean, you may put it in the other way, you may take other examples, but there are certainly many examples where at the end of the day, many people tell you, well, you see there is a clear effect, so don't care about the design or don't care about the type 1 error. And this means that we don't care about the frequentist idea behind it. So it's certainly a problem we have to deal with. Okay, benefit-risk profile. At the end of the day, you know, well, this is what counts. And then you may say, okay, if you have additional claims, then you can improve the risk-benefit profile. And if you have a very complex hypothesis framework, then you have the chance to prove different things in a confirmatory way with a higher power than, well, with a less clever method. And then you may end up with many confirmatory claims that would inform in a better way the benefit risk profile. You would be more confident in your risk benefit assessment. So, but okay, the conclusions then depend on the way you plan it, on the way you write it down, and on the multiplicity procedure. In our frequentist thinking, it depends on how the multiplicity procedure was planned, and this could again be a problem in assessment, at least if you don't follow completely the frequentist idea. And you may also end up with the problem that multiplicity adjustment could penalize complex frameworks compared to simple ones, where we don't adjust, where we say, okay, that's just as it is. So there are some issues and some thoughts we have to make on claims that go into the benefit risk profile, at least. Okay, and then usually what we want to see are confidence intervals. If we have an estimate, and benefit risk profile is based on estimates as well. So and we would like to see the uncertainty behind it, and we would like to see confidence intervals. But as you know, for most of the clever multiplicity procedures, there are no useful straightforward confidence intervals that relate to these testing procedures. But in benefit risk, we would like to see them. It's certainly a problem. Okay, so there are some issues to be resolved. Secondary endpoints, the role of secondary endpoints, transparency. How do we, let's say, translate our frequentist thinking? How do we translate the process? And because the results, not only the results themselves, but only the ways to get there would be relevant if you do it in a confirmatory way. Okay. Confidence intervals, risk benefit. Okay, how to deal with this? And yeah, now let's summarize the comments we got on the concept paper. We got comments basically, we got comments from 4 different groups. The FSPI or the FPIA group, and probably the most extensive document we got from QSPI, Multiplicity Working Group, led by Alex Dimitrenko, I think. And then we got some other comments from 2 University, Ohio, and Lancaster. Okay. So the major comments relate first, the scope of the guideline. What is the scope of the guideline? Early phase, is it included? Dose finding, is it included? Etc., etc. I think this can be dealt with in a simple way. Then type of error control. Do we stick to our strong family-wise error rates? Or are we going to talk about false discovery rate, for example? So, good question can be asked. Certainly a point to discuss. As I said, simultaneous confidence intervals are heavily discussed, and how can we get them? Or shall we stick to, let's say, Bonferroni-like confidence tests or confidence intervals related to the simple Bonferroni-like tests? So, and then can we end up in a situation, for example, where the confidence intervals does not relate to the statistical test, and then we may get contradictory results, where the confidence interval excludes the 0, but the test does not see an effect, or vice versa. Okay. Relationship between hypotheses if the framework is complex. So how can we use clinical information to exclude interpretational problems? So do we have to use, let's say, a reasonable procedure, for example, reasonable hierarchical procedure to come up with a conclusion that excludes interpretational problems, consistency problems, etc. Role of secondary endpoints, of course. I talked about subgroups. Of course, will be an issue. when do we need to predefine subgroups, for example? It's somehow similar to the secondary endpoint problem. Do we have to, do we need a confirmatory claim on predefined subgroups, or when do we need it? Okay. Objectives, terminology. It's probably all more about terminology. Well, we are not quite clear what we mean by adjustment, non-adjustment, etc. Well, I think some of these points have already been tackled in the old guideline, referring to terminology and objectives, but maybe not always clear and consistent. Okay. Other minor comments on multiplicity. Okay. Adjustment and safety. And I guess that we are not going here more into the safety assessments. Composite endpoints, I don't remember what it was. Probably, well, what are I doing with the components of the composite endpoints, which was also already mentioned in the old guideline. Interim decisions, as I said. Multiplicity in parallel studies was mentioned, especially in bioequivalence. Well, you try out different bioequivalence trials, and in the 10th trial, finally you get a bioequivalence, and can we accept this? Multiple doses was mentioned, probably not really an issue here. Well, in dose finding, I think now we say that it's more an estimation problem in dose findings studies, and if it's confirmatory, it's a phase 3 study, then okay, we would like to have a conclusion on individual dose needed. And then, of course, it was also mentioned here the multi-regional trials and the different SAPs for different agencies. And it seems that people expect a clear statement from us whether we accept different SAPs for different regulatory bodies without adjustments. Rob already gave an answer from his point of view, from a CHMP point of view. Consistency between regions, and this relates to more to the problems related to subgroups, and probably also tackled in the subgroup guideline. Thank you very much.